right, so today we're going to be talking about classification and how scientists classify all the living organisms on Earth. Before we get started, let's just look at all the different organisms that exist. So there's tons of different, there's a lot of different diversity on Earth. There's over 5,200 types of prokaryotic organisms. That means 5,200 species of bacteria. Over 5,100,000 types of fungi. Over 400,000 species of plants, over 52,000 vertebrates, and over 1,000,000 species of insects. And that's a lot of different organisms that scientists have to classify. And there's one system that classifies everything. So, just a brief intro with some definitions. Classification is grouping objects based on similarities. So, we do that every day with random organisms. Like if I told you I was wearing flip-flops, you'd have an idea of what was on my foot, even though you don't necessarily know all the details about my flip-flops. Whereas taxonomy is the specific branch of biology that classifies organisms, and then we slowly put them into many different groups to compare them based on their similarities. So you're going to go ahead and pull up this sheet if you haven't already done so, so you can answer your questions as we go. So if you haven't pulled this up, make sure you go ahead and pause and pull this up because we're about to get started talking about number 1. So classification started way back in time with the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He came up with the first ever biological classification system. His didn't last terribly long before a new system was created by Linnaeus, the Linnaeus system. And the Linnaeus system was created by a man named Carolus Linnaeus. Carolus Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist. He studied plants, and he developed a specific classification system in which all organisms were classified based on their physical and structural similarities. So he used physical and structure similarities to classify all organisms, and he created the Linnaeus system. So go ahead, stop the video, go ahead and answer question 1. Question 1, who was Carolus Linnaeus? If you need to pause here, you can. All right, so while we're going as species, again, we're going to just define species again, even though we talked about it several times in the past. A species is a unique group of organisms that are able to interbreed with one another and produce fertile offspring, and they don't reproduce with another group. So an example of that, a horse and a zebra, they belong to different species. We know they're in different species because when they do mate, their offspring are sterile, meaning that the offspring can't have babies itself. Because that offspring is not 100% completely normal, they're considered different species. Two organisms in the same species needed to be able to mate, have perfectly normal offspring. So since this is not a perfectly normal offspring, the horse and the zebra are different species. So go ahead and pause, answer question number 2, which is what makes an organism a member of the same species? So which makes two organisms members of the same species? You can pause here. It's right here on this page. All right, so Carolus Linnaeus also developed a naming system for organisms to give all organisms a scientific name, and that is called binomial nomenclature. So the prefix bi means two, nomial means name, and nomenclature is a naming system. So binomial nomenclature is a 2-word naming system, and it's used to name every species. And the way every organism is named is based on its genus and its species. And these are the 2 most specific groups that organisms are placed into, which are genus and species. So there's going to be 2 names, 2 words. The first is going to be the genus of the organism. A genus is a group of similar species. So 2 species that are very similar would be in the same genus. So the first name is the genus. The second word of the name is going to be the species. and that is a one specific type of organism. So you may have heard that humans' scientific name is Homo sapien. That means that humans are in the genus Homo, and our species is sapien. When you write this out, Homo is capital, the genus is always capitalized, but the species is not. So the first word in the name is going to be the genus, second word is the species. Now, one thing you might say, these are weird names, like none of the names you're going to hear are going to be normal type of names. They're all based in Latin. And the reason that we use Latin is because way back in the Middle Ages, and even still today, Latin is a universal language. Latin has not changed over many years. It's the only stable language that we have. I mean, even some language like English and Spanish, if you go to different places in America, there's going to be different types of English. If you go to different places in other countries, there's going to be different types of Spanish. Depending on where you live, there's different versions of the same language, but Latin is universal, and it's really important in science because scientists come from all different types of places, and as long as they have a very similar base language, they are able to effectively communicate. Similar for doctors. If a surgeon was in one country, grew up in one country, and went somewhere else and needed to perform a surgery, say help someone in an emergency, but they couldn't communicate with the doctors, it would be horrible. But since a lot of medical words are based in Latin, they have some type of common base universal language, which is very helpful. All right, so we're going to go ahead and pause here and answer question number 3. Explain binomial nomenclature. You want to pause here for this slide. Can answer explain binomial nomenclature. So moving on. All of life, every organism is placed into 8 different groups. Each group is called a taxon. A taxon is another name for a group. So every organism is placed into 8 groups. The 8 groups are domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. If you want to pause and go ahead and write those out, you can, because it's going to be right here. So the way that this works is at the very top with domain, there are 3 domains. So let's just start with one of them. Let's say here is one domain. That domain contains tons of organisms. Let's say this is all organisms with a nucleus. That's a very large group of all organisms with a nucleus. That would be like an amoeba and a dog and a tree and a butterfly and a worm and a mushroom. All of those would be has a nucleus domain. That domain will then be split into different kingdoms. Each kingdom will then be split further into phylums. Each phylum I'm not going to be able to fit all of them, but you get the idea, is that each phylum will be split out into classes. Each class is going to be split out into different orders, and so on down the list. So it's kind of like a branching tree based on characteristics. So we might start with everything with a nucleus and then break it down into only animals, and then animals with a spinal cord, animals that, I don't know, have an amniotic egg, and then mammals. I'm just giving random examples, and you split until you get very specific. So the domain is going to have the most organisms, and the smallest is the species. So you slowly break these down until we get to the most unique group. So the way that we simulate this system in a class, I've done this in classes before, is everybody throws in all of their shoes. So everybody's shoes is here. Then we split those one group of shoes into 4 groups of shoes based on their similarities. Maybe all of these are red, all of these are blue, all of these are black, and these are, I don't know, what's another shoe? Green. Then each of those is split. So here, this group would be split into 3, this group would be split into 3, this group would be split into 3, and this group would be split into 3 small groups. And we keep going with this process until we get to individual shoes to make it more and more specific. We break it down. So here, stripes and polka dots and leopard print, or plain and zigzags and light up sneakers, something like that. And you keep putting them into groups until your groups only get down to 1 individual per group. It's the same thing that we're doing here. You slowly break it down to the smallest possible group. Now there is a mnemonic device to remember: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, on fat green snakes. So you can remember that. D for domain, K for kingdom, V for phylum, C for class, O for order, F for family, G for genus, S for species. I've heard other people say, did King Philip come over for great spaghetti? That works too. Whatever you like best, you can use. Now, based on our diagram here, if 2 organisms are in the same order, they're going to be in the same class. They're going to be in the same phylum. They're going to be in the same kingdom, and they're going to be in the same domain. So because this is a branching system, if 2 organisms are in the same family, they are also in the same order, class, phylum, kingdom, and domain. So if they're in the same family, they're also in the same everything above this. If they're in the same phylum, they're in the same kingdom and domain. So if they have genus in common, they have everything above genus in common too, because this is a branching system. All right, so now we're going to go ahead, we're going to pause, and we're going to answer questions 4. You should have been doing that one as we went. 5, 6, and also 7. So we're going to add 7 to this. So you're going to go ahead, list these out, and write the mnemonic device. You can ignore all this stuff I did over here. If 2 organisms are in the same family, going back to our list here, if they're in the same family, which others do they have to have in common? All right, for number 6, a cat's scientific name is Felis domesticus. Which one of those is the genus? Is the genus Felis or is the genus Domesticus? You can use this slide if you pause to answer that question. Then number 7, which of these species is most closely related to Felis rufus? So again, you can use this slide to answer this question. All right, so the 3 domains on Earth, the 3 overarching domains, let's see if I can go ahead and write those in over here. I'll write those in, and you can write these in too. There are 3 domains. Domain number 1 is bacteria. Bacteria, these are going to be pathogenic. They make you sick. Number 2 is archaea. These are going to be the extreme bacteria that live in extreme places. Number 3 is eukarya. Eukarya are everything with a nucleus. Remember, nuke, you have a nucleus. These 3 domains are then split into 6 kingdoms. The weird thing about this is that Archaebacteria and Eubacteria is here, Archaebacteria is here. So bacteria and Archaebacteria, their domain doesn't branch from domain to kingdom. Their domain is the same kingdom because they're so large. They're very, very large. One thing that we want to remember as we're going through these different kingdoms is that when scientists are classifying these organisms, they look at both their appearance and behavior, the traits that they have, the genes and DNA that they have, the way that they develop, as well as the fossil record for their past history. So as I go through, make sure you pause where you need to and fill out the chart. I'll be filling out the chart along with you as well, but if you need to pause, feel free to go ahead and do so at any point. So first we're going to start with the 2 prokaryotic kingdoms. Remember, prokaryotic means no nucleus. So pro equals no nucleus. Whereas a eukaryote, nuke, there is a nucleus. So prokaryotes are bacteria. So our 2 bacterias are going to be prokaryotic. So our 2 bacterias are prokaryotic. We know these are bacteria because it conveniently says bacteria. Characteristics of all bacteria: they are alive. They're a cell. There's only one cell, so each bacteria is only one cell. They do not have a nucleus, therefore they are prokaryotic, and they do contain a cell wall. So we're going to start off by looking at eubacteria. Eubacteria, again, are prokaryotic because they have no nucleus. They are unicellular, meaning they're only made of one cell. We're not going to worry about this category. Bacteria are pathogenic. Pathogenic means bacteria would be E. coli or strep throat. Things that any bacteria that makes you sick is going to be a eubacteria. Archaebacteria, again, they are a bacteria, so they are prokaryotic. They have no nucleus. They are only one cell. Archaebacteria are extremophiles. So archaebacteria are extremophiles. You can think of this E for extreme, extremophiles. And they live in places that no other things live, like a hot vent, hot spring, acidic environment. So bacteria in the stomach. The stomach is very, very acidic, so bacteria in our stomach are going to be archaebacteria because they live in extreme places. All right, next we're going to look at the category protist. Now, when we break these down, these first 2 are our prokaryotes. The rest of them are eukaryotes. So the protist, a eukaryote. Unique. Protists are quite unique because protists are one cell that have a nucleus. So are one cell that have a nucleus. And they're also unique because they can be either heterotrophs or autotrophs. So autotrophs mean they make their own food, and heterotrophs mean they rely on others for food. So protists are one cell with a nucleus. They can either make their own food or eat other things. An example of these is an amoeba. You see amoebas making the news typically around late August, September, maybe early October. Typically on the news, you'll see where someone has died of a brain-eating amoeba. So the Miss Ray tip of the day is if you are going somewhere to swim where the water is not moving, so stable water like a lake, make sure you plug your nose because that's how some organisms can get in. If you jump into water and it shoots up your nose, the brain-eating amoeba can go to your brain. Now, while that is a very real thing that does exist, it's quite rare, and again, you only typically see on the one. So my protist important fact is going to be one cell with the nucleus. This is when a lot of students get confused on protist, one cell, nucleus. Now we're going to go into plants. So plants, they are eukaryotes because they have a nucleus. They are multicellular, meaning they are made of more than one cell. They use photosynthesis to make their own food, so they are autotrophs. They do have a cell wall. Their cell wall is made of cellulose. And examples of plants include trees, ferns, grasses, flowers. You know plants fairly well. Okay, we're going to go into fungi. Fungi are eukaryotes because their cells have a nucleus. They are multicellular because they're made of more than one cell. They are heterotrophs. They're heterotrophs because they feed through absorption, so they rely on others to get their food. Examples of fungi include mushrooms, mold, and yeast. I'm trying to write absorption here. It's not wanting to work. You can keep filling that in, absorption. Alrighty, and then our last kingdom brings us down to the one you all probably know best, and that is animals. The animal kingdom contains organisms that are eukaryotic because they all have a nucleus. They are multicellular and heterotrophs because they rely on others for food. Examples of animals. I'm gonna go with the good old snake, but you could also write a spider or a human or a whale or a worm or a peacock or a sponge. They can be as simple as a sponge or complex as a human. But one trait that they do have, that animals have, that no other kingdom does, is that animals are motile, meaning animals can choose to get up and move. They can move and choose to move, meaning we are motile. All right, so I'm going to go through. I'll read the follow-up questions. We're not going to go through the answers. We're going to go through the follow-up questions. Number 8. Name, describing, classifying. Is that adaptation, natural selection, attacking? What of the following groups would have the largest number of organisms? For that one, you just scroll up to the list you made under number 4. Figure out which is the largest group. For number 10, go up to your chart. check out your chart, and you are going to say which kingdom contains organisms that cannot move, have a nucleus, heterotrophs, but are multicellular. So multicellular, heterotrophs with a nucleus but cannot move. Using the same chart, you're going to figure out what organism would be in a kingdom if it was autotropic, had a nucleus, but was one cell. So one cell with a nucleus, what kingdom is that? Number 12, what kingdom of life contains organisms that live in extreme environments and are prokaryotic? So extreme environments, prokaryotic. Number 13, a new organism has been discovered in the mountain of Virginia. The organism has a nucleus, makes its own food, and is multicellular. What is it? Nucleus, makes its own food, multicellular. What is it? And then here we are looking at this chart. We are looking at the cucumber versus the other organisms. The question asking you the characteristics in the chart, which is mostly closely related to the cucumber. So look at the traits that the cucumber has and the traits that the other organisms have. Which one, plant, pumpkin, pepper, okra, is most related to the cucumber? All right, there's going to be questions on Canvas.